Greetings and welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, where today we are wrapping up the video that we started, the project that we started literally 2 years ago, tanning some pig hides using eastern hemlock bark. Now, link at the top of the screen to the original video if this is just where you're jumping into the project and you want to go back to where we started. We did a video preparing the skins, preparing the bark, harvesting the bark, preparing the bark solutions, and how we set all that up. And then we set all that up, and we waited. And we strengthened the bark liquor, and we waited. And we strengthened the bark liquor again, and we waited. And it started working slowly, then started working well, and then after I released the original video, it just kind of stopped. So I wanted here in the intro to catch you up a little bit on what I did off camera, troubleshooting things a little bit. Because pig hides have a couple of things about them that are different from just about any other hide that you're likely to work with. And that is they have a thin dermis. It's a very, very thin skin. They have a thin epidermis, but it's very, very hard. Very hard, very, very impermeable, very waterproof. And there's a lot of grease in them, okay? So a pig hide, you think about the boar shield that, is the big, thick, inch, 2 inch, 3 inch thick. I don't know how thick they can get in the maximum case, but they're thick. On the shoulders of the boar where they dig at each other with tusks. And they have all that padding and material to keep them from getting cut up and getting lethal wounds. Almost all of that is fat, okay? It adheres tightly to the dermis and has to be scraped off with vigor. But once you've scraped off all of the fat, the skin that you have left is very thin, thinner than a deer hide, okay? Thinner than a deer hide. It's kind of in the same category as like a sheep hide, really. Very, very thin material. But even though the epidermis is also thin, but it's kind of a disproportionately large percentage of the overall skin, because everything is thin, and the epidermis is very hard and waterproof. So those kind of weirdness about the structure, and then all of the fat that's in it, the base of every hair cell and every pore has a giant glob of fat, which you cannot get out, but as they dry, they extrude, but then that saturates all the other tissues, which is waterproof to begin with, right? So it was a fight. It was a fight. I've never fought that hard to get a hide to accept tanning materials, okay? What I ended up doing off camera was taking a jug of, I had the 4 hides, 2 each in a barrel. I dumped an entire bottle of dish liquid in those barrels, and I dumped an entire bottle of rubbing alcohol in each of those barrels, okay, for a little bit more solvent. And once that, it's like I said, it kind of stopped because it started working into the surface and then kind of got stuck in the interior fatty layers. And then with all of those other solvents, it started again. But in the meantime, the skin kind of collapsed a little bit, so it ended up with a very, very thin leather, very hard leather, very thin leather. Hemlock bark is known for making a hard leather, okay? A tiny bit on the brittle side. Not that you'll notice that if you're making a bag or a hat or something, but back in the day, the oak bark tanned leather was used for strapping and belts, okay, like machinery belts. Hemlock bark tanned leather was used for saddle work and things like hats and bags, right? They didn't use hemlock tanned leather for machinery belts because it's a little bit too brittle. It's not stretchy enough, and it's a little bit too brittle. So, knowing that going in is fine. I wanted some hard leather for some gathering bags that hold their shape, right? These guys, we'll talk more about these at the end of the video. But the time it took to get the hide to fully accept the tannin was a little unfortunate because it didn't expand fast enough. It kind of collapsed in on itself a little bit because by the time I got enough solvent in there that it would absorb the tannins, the tannin was already penetrating and the fluids didn't have a time to swell the leather back up to its final shape. Now the one that worked a lot better was the one that we treated with alum first, because that pre-swelled the dermal layer. So if I just hold this in the middle, right, this roll of leather, you can see that's nice and soft and supple. Whereas, and these are the two that we work in the video, the one that's bark only is, you know, workably soft and nice, but it's obviously a lot stiffer. You know, it's nice workable stuff. It's a lot stiffer than the one that was pre-treated with the alum. So I'm learning some things about pigskin. We do have 4 successful hides. 3 are prepared. 1 is still in the soup, but I need to get out later. I'm not going to do that in the video. But I did 1 of each type here in the video. We have 4 successful hides. We have good leather for lots of nice projects. But there's still things to learn, because you can always do it better next time. And that's part of the skill building project. I love going and digging into all of these different hides, all of these different methods, just experimenting with stuff. If you don't push things to the point where something could have gone better and you can learn from it, you're not learning and continuing to master the skill set that you're seeking. Okay? So if that is your goal. Now I understand if your goal is to make one thing, make it well, do it reproducibly, and it's a means to another end, sure, do it. But if you really want to master a broad, you know, the full depth of some skill set, you've got to keep pushing it. You've got to keep throwing new methods, trying new things, do things you've never done before, work with hides you've never worked before, or materials you've never worked before, whatever category it is, and keep pushing the envelope. So I'll talk about some of my conclusions and things I want to try next time I get my hands on some pigskins. I don't know when that will be. I don't have any at the moment. But again, there's the link that I already put up at the top of the screen if you want to go back to the original video and come through, and I'll show you pulling these out and working them and oiling them and softening and flattening them in, you know, through the finishing process as we work with the ones that we've already done. See you in the project. Okay, here we have 2 of these 4 pig hides that I have just pulled out of the soup. Now, right away, you should be able to see a fairly significant difference between the drapiness of this hide and the stiff lumpiness of that hide, okay? And this has to do with the different treatments. So if we remember back from the first video where we were preparing these hides, the hair-on hide I pre-treated in alum, okay? So because of that, this hide was opened up really, really nice. All of the glycoproteins were destroyed by the alum and the sulfuric acid it produces. So it comes out of the bark very, very much softer and more supple, okay, than this. This process of treating stuff initially with alum and then subsequently with bark is what's called latigo leather, okay? And it's halfway between a soft garment leather and a heavy boot leather in its characteristics, okay? So this will not be as soft as just a straight up alum tan followed by fat liquoring followed by like smoking or formaldehyde treatment, which is, you know, standard for a garment leather, but it's going to be a lot softer and more supple than this stiff as a board piece of bark only leather. Now for both of these, what we need to do is we need to clean them and we need to start the drying process, okay? Before we can do that, we're going to have to get this unfolded. It's going to need its own special treatment for that. So we're going to work on this one first. And just an initial cleaning. You can see there's lots of suds in here from all of the soap that I had to add to get the bark to penetrate these greasy, greasy, greasy hides. Okay. But we're just washing. I don't have a nice spot where I can both use a hose and film at the same time. Definitely use a hose to do this if you have a hose available. Okay. But just washing, just starting the rinsing process before we start to dry it. Because over the course of all of the rounds of bark tea that we've added, like the bark's never totally clean, there's mud that gets in, there's little bits of bark that slough off, and then there's bacteria that grow in the ferment. Now, you're not going to get bacteria growing in a bark ferment that are going to be any danger to you, right? Because your pH of your skin and your tissues is so different from the pH in these buckets that they're not really going to be a threat to you, but they're still there, and they're still kind of making things a little bit more slimy than one might consider optimal. So we want to get all of that washed off real nice like. We're just going to take multiple buckets, or some time with the hose, get all that soap and all that slime, and these were in there for 2 years, right? Slime's going to happen, okay? So we got to get all of that out because we don't want it to dry. And it's interesting here, you can see this pig hair where these white spots were. They're not white anymore. They've definitely been dyed a light tan color by all the tannic acid in this bath. But they're not super crazy dark like the backside of the hide is. And that's that hydrophobicity of the pig hair, right, that's resisting that. So we're going to get this washed front and back, and then hang it out to dry, and that's going to be the first step for this. So this is mostly rinsed off. It'll need a little bit more cleaning work, but it's going to get a lot more done to it as we go along. But you can see it's quite a bit nicer, less slimy. And here's the back side. And I just think it's interesting on this one how much lighter a color the back of the leather is and the alum treated than the straight bark only skin. It's a much lighter shade of that reddish brown that you get from hemlock bark. So that's interesting. Anybody who's interested in dyeing with natural dyes and dyeing leather with natural dyes, I just wanted to note that, right, that this is pig skin, pre-mortarted with alum, and then soaked for 2 years in hemlock bark. And this is pig skin, raw, stuck right in hemlock bark for 2 years, and it's a very different shade. So as anybody who dyes knows, you'll get very different colors with different dyeing materials, different mordants, and different times. So it's worth it for an example to show that. Now, I also hosed this off, and I did take these over to the hose to do this. This, you can see there's some parts where the epidermis just did not want to take the dye, take the color, take the tannin. There's nothing else that's going to be done to these at this point. They are what they are. We're going to get the best pieces of leather out of them, and if there's a spot that just does not want to soften and does not want to be leather, we'll just cut around it for small projects, okay? I have some thoughts on why this is happening. I've had some conversations with a Tlingit woman from Alaska who's working with seal hide tanning and has seen a similar thing with the epidermis of seal skins being very, very reluctant to deeply absorb the tanning chemicals. My hypothesis on this is that in handling this, it shrunk up too much, especially with the drying, and then going right into the acid, it never allowed the epidermis to re-expand and absorb and be able to absorb those fluids. Her seal tanning method has a step where they treat the hide of the seal skin with a weak base, and I think that is the problem that this is dealing with. So I look forward to doing another run with some more pig skins and seeing how a soak-in base to swell up that epidermis might change the tanning results. I look forward to that. These hides with really greasy, really thick, or really strong epidermal layers just are a different beast than working with a deer hide or a cow hide or some other thing like that. And it is truly a really, really stiff epidermis. When I run my fingernails across it, it is stiff as a board. And even in fully softened leather, where the grain side is really nice and just like you would expect from a cow skin, this epidermis is still really, really hard. So I think that that's the issue here. I look forward to experimenting more with it. But back to the initial stages of this piece, I just forcibly unrolled it so that I could wash it. And now, even before we start drying, I need to start breaking this hide. And some people call it breaking, some people would call it staking. It's all the same thing. Traditionally, with deerskin, this was done over a stake, working it back and forth across the stake, as with a lot of fur skins. That was also done. But there's a way we can do this with a large cattle hide, where we take the hide and we fold it, and then just roll your hand out. And that action of making that crease and rolling that crease along the hide will open up those fibers, loosen up those fibers, and allow it to lay flatter, stretch back out a little bit, because the astringency of the tannic acid pulls it in. Okay? So we're going to just do this, and you can see how that's now laying flatter, and it's a lot more pliable. Okay? So the first hide was pliable enough right off the bat that I don't need to do this initial step, but it will need to be broken and or staked, depending on which set of terminology you want to work with, in the drying and oiling process. It's going to get the same treatment. But I don't need to do an extra round because it's soft enough to go right to drying. Whereas this one, can you see how even with that little bit of work, it's starting to lay down and stretch out and become pliable enough that I can work with it as a sheet instead of as a big, nasty, stiff lump. Other ways you could do this, you could take this to a fleshing beam and scud it, and it would have a lot of the same effect. But if you're doing that, you want to make sure that you're doing it with a dull fleshing knife so that you don't scratch the grain, especially at this late stage. You could do it with a stake, or if you're lucky enough to have a staking machine, you could do it with a staking machine. But you do want to do this in any of those ways, and if you're doing it the way that I'm doing it, just rolling it, you want to know that if you do it the way I'm currently doing it, folding grain side against grain side, it will accentuate texture in the grain. If you do it the other way, where you're folding flesh side against flesh side, you will have the same effect in terms of starting the softening process, but instead of accentuating texture in the grain, you're going to iron out the texture in the grain a little bit because you're stretching the grain. Okay? On this pig hide, I'm ultimately going to do it both ways, and it will just be its best self. I'm not trying to create or prevent any particular texture, but I am trying to create the nicest, softest piece of what will still be hard leather that I'm able to. But I want a nice piece that'll work well. Okay? And you can see it's starting to stretch out and lay flat quite nicely. So let's put it back where it was, and you can compare how this section is resting against this bench in comparison to how this section is resting against the bench. So I'm going to work this whole thing. You need a surface, a flat, hard surface at a comfortable height. I'm using this bench because I can move it into a nice area to film for you, but I'm probably going to do the rest of this just
on the sidewalk concrete, right, on a concrete slab. That works just as well. If you want to do this standing, you can do it on a nice tabletop. But I'm doing it here on this bench mostly because it's better scenery for filming. So I'm going to keep working on these, and then I'm going to let them dry just by draping them over the edge of a fence. I'm just going to let them dry until they're dry to the point that they no longer feel wet, but they still feel a little bit cool to the touch. So any of the free drippy water is gone, but there's still a good bit of moisture in the hide. I don't want them to get all the way to bone dry at this stage. Okay, so I worked this enough that I could get it, flat-ish enough to drape it over a fence and dry it out enough. So you don't need to get it perfect in that first little bit of working, because as it dries, since we've taken the vast majority of the natural oils out and we haven't replaced them with anything, as it dries, it's going to stiffen up again, okay? So it's kind of a waste of effort to spend too much time working it in that initial stage. So this is, it's at that stage. It doesn't feel wet. There's no free moisture on top of the skin, but it's cool, right? It's cool. And it's not stiff as a board, so we know it hasn't completely dried out yet. Right now, some of these areas out at the edge don't feel quite as cool and are quite a bit stiffer, so they lost a little bit more moisture. That's typical of thinner belly skin anyway. Now, in order to be capable of doing the final working and really soften this and turn it into a good hide, we need to replace those oils, and we need to have just the right moisture content. If it's too wet, yes, you can break it, but a little bit, but it'll never stay broken. And if it's too dry, the fibers are already locked together, so you can't break it. So we need to get those oils in, and we need to get it to just that right moisture content. So this is the same mixture that I use for brain tanning. I have explained making this at length in some other videos. I will put a link to those at the bottom of the screen and end screen. But short version, what this is equal parts grated lye bar soap. So like Fells Naphtha is a good example if you're buying it. What I'm using here is lye soap that was made in the soap making video. I'll also make sure there's a link to that somewhere around this video. Made from straight beef tallow. Okay, so you grate that up, and then you mix that with an equal part of warm water. Let it sit for a half hour for all of the soap to rehydrate, and it'll stiffen up a bit as you do that. It'll be really, really watery right at first, then it'll kind of stiffen up and gel a little bit as all the soap dissolves. And then you're going to mix an equal part of liquid oil. If you want to go with a full animal oil, you could look at something like neat's foot or bink oil, or if you have it, even like bear grease or raccoon oil, right? Any of those sorts of things. If you're not in a situation where you're hyper concerned about having all animal oils, you can use any of the liquid vegetable oils will work well. Corn oil, canola oil. I'm using just corn oil in this batch. What you don't want to use is a hardening oil. So for this purpose, you don't want to use a fish oil because those will oxidize. They're used in oil tanning. They have their own place and purpose, but not right here in this. You don't want to use linseed oil because that will harden into a varnish-like material. And you don't want to use safflower or any of the nut oils for the same reason. Don't use walnut oil or anything like that. So just simple corn or canola will work well for this for most hide types. And then we're just going to come here on the flesh side, take a handful of this. We're just going to rub it in, make a big old mess. Rub it in. Make sure you get it everywhere and all the way out to the edges where you have some of these little folds that kind of hardened up again a little bit. Make sure you get it all around those folds. So I don't want you to think that my recipe for this is the only one that'll work. There are many recipes for fat liquoring grease. That's all this is. They will all work. And any of the recipes for brain tanning or egg tanning or fat liquor tanning, right, buckskin making, those are just fat liquors. And all of those will work just as well in this setting as they will in brain tanning. This is exactly the same stuff I use for my, in air quotes, brain tan. And I use this for brain tanning because with chronic wasting disease around, I'm not splitting skulls anywhere near where my sheep might ever be, ever. We don't know enough about that disease to know what it can get into and what it can't. We don't know where it might be hiding. So in this modern world, with all sorts of new diseases hiding all over the place, I'm just not opening up a deer skull. Or really any. There's just too many, there's too many known unknowns. Okay. So that is fully greased up all the way out to the edges in all of the folds. So now we're going to take it, we're going to fold it. Yeah, like I said, I don't mind getting it on the surface of this. We'll see how this hide behaves. We might even grease down this outer surface anyway. Just going to kind of deliberately scrape up some of what's down here on the tarp. As well, it's all good stuff. Okay, so this is cool. You see all these little white spots where the grease came through? Mm-hmm. Those are pores, and those are where all of those pores in the live skin used to have a fat pocket in them. Okay. So that's coming through that way. This is a very... Pig skin is very, very thin relative to the size of the animal. Very, very dense. It's also very, very porous. Now let me change my mind. I'm going to put just a little bit of this on the surface here. I'm not going to go crazy with it. Where I got it by accident on the other side, I was like, you know what, that is loosening up a little better. Plenty of material, so. Just do a real quick and dirty job here. Stuff is real good for your hands too. If you do this for a while, you'll notice that you've been very moisturized. Okay. Now, everywhere all over. And we're just going to roll this up. It's still a little bit stiff. It hasn't absorbed all of that moisture yet. As I roll it, I'm just going to put a little bit more in some areas to help it loosen up a little bit better. will have a little bit of stearin residue from doing this, but that's okay. Okay, so there. Now this piece, when I'm all done here, is going to get rolled up in this tarp so that it doesn't dry too much. Can absorb all of that. Before I do that, I've got to go get the other one and treat it. So this is the hair on hide, okay? And this did not dry out as much as the hair off hide because since it's been pre-treated in alum, it's a lot more porous. But we're going to do this in exactly the same way and roll it up in exactly the same way. But of course, I'm definitely not going to put any of the goop on the hair side, obviously. And then these are good. These two hides will get rolled up side by side, 2 peas in a pod, and they're going to be wrapped overnight in this tarp so that they can absorb all of these nice, beautiful oils. Let's unroll this and see what we've got inside here. It's going to be a little bit greasy looking still, because where you have these deep pockets, right, obviously that one spot can't absorb all of that grease. So as we go, we'll kind of even that out a little bit. That's normal and expected and not a problem. Okay. Here's the inside. And yes, there's some that isn't absorbed, because we're not just asking it to absorb the oils, we're asking it to absorb the moisture. It's only going to take up so much in a certain amount of time. But now, since this is here in place, as we start to work it, you can see it was, remember how it was stiff last night and some of these folds were really rigid from being dry? Now they're not anymore because we've added some moisture back in. And now, just as we were doing it before, by taking sections and rolling it and working that crease in order to break the hide, we're just going to keep doing that. And as this dries here inside, we want to do this out of the sun because at this point we don't want it to dry too quickly. We want this to take its time. We're just going to keep doing this, which is going to continue to break the hide and massage those oils into it so that we get a nice flexible leather. Now, I'm showing a process. This is sort of an all-day thing. I'm not going to record 12 or 15 hours of doing the same repetitive motion, because I'll be doing this for a little bit and then I'll walk away from it, and then I'll do this for a little bit and then walk away from it, so on and so forth. What you'll find is as you're going, if it's too wet, it won't stretch out because it's still too just stretchy. It'll just act like almost like a dough.
Right, you stretch it and it springs back, and stretch it, it springs back. It doesn't really make any progress. If it's too dry, you can't stretch it. There, in between those two things, there is a happy medium, perfect moisture content, where you stretch it, it breaks the fibers loose. There's enough moisture still in it that the fibers can move and break free from each other, but it's dry enough that it's not rubbery and it doesn't pull itself back together. Once you hit that and work it at that, with a bark tanned hide, it will stay in that condition. So I'm going to keep doing this, and you can see how, how quickly that oil is working in with a little bit of stretching of the hide, right? As you stretch the fibers, they open up, it makes more space for the oils to get in, and then they penetrate deeper, okay? So doing this right now, I know it's not quite the right degree of dryness to stay permanently soft, but starting the process while it's a little too wet is helping all of that nice oil mixture get in there, really penetrate the skin, and it'll make a nice leather when we're done. I'll pop back on and do a little bit more filming for you when there's something different to see. But before I turn the camera off, I do want to mention that when I unrolled the fur on hide, it was way, way, way too wet. So that just went back out to dry outside a little bit more. See you in a few. This is reaching that perfect little happy medium moisture content where there's enough moisture in it that it's possible to break apart the fibers, but not so much that they spring right back together. And I just did a bunch of work right here on this little corner, and I want you to see some of the color change, right? So you see how this is a lighter, more of a brownish, where some of these areas where it's real pulled in are more of a blackish, okay? This is what the broken hide looks like. It will lighten a little bit. It will show you what's happened. So now if I come over to this area, and I'm going to work here, again, I'm just rolling it, just kind of kneading it like it's a piece of bread almost. Just keep working it. And you can see you see how this lightening up? We're getting some of that color change in there, right? So as you're doing this, you'll get some visual cues that it's working. And as you go, and you see those visual cues, you know it's working. And when you know it's working, you also know that's what you're going to get. So different levels have different possibilities for softness. And that's a combination of the tanning method, tanning chemistry, and the hide you're working with. This pig hide is very thin, very, very thin. Thinner than deer hide, but it's very dense. And the hemlock bark is, of all of the tannin, plant-based tannin sources, it produces one of the densest, hardest leathers because it just pulls everything together in the tanning process. So we have a thin, dense hide with a tanning process that makes it denser. So we're not going to get like supple lambskin glove leather here. This is going to be a hard, durable, utilitarian type of leather. Okay? So if you're working it and you see your results coming in and you get an impact, you see that you're having an impact,
and then you keep working it and it doesn't look like it's changing, and you keep working it and it doesn't look like it's changing, and you keep working it, it doesn't look like it's changing, stop beating yourself to death. You have the leather that you made, right? So, you know, if it's way too hard in that way, you pick a different tanning method next time and use that piece for something else. Now, I just like to experiment with everything. And I have so many radically different projects that I want to work on. No matter what kind of leather I get, I have a project for it. And that's kind of my goal, is to be able to do a huge array of very different things. Okay? If you want to do one thing consistently, then what you want to do is work in small batches with small swatches till you get that one thing that you want, and then do that over and over again without varying. But those are very different goal sets. So, you can see now this whole area has lightened up. Okay? Still stiff, still relatively hard, but this is going to be a stiff hide when it's finished. Okay, that's the nature of the leather. Now right over here you can see some of these white spots. That's some of that stearic acid drying on the surface that I was mentioning. So that's not a problem. That's just from the oil. A lot of that's going to flake off and go away as we're working this. And I'm just going to keep going over this hide. Go over the whole hide, just kneading it just like I was, a little patch at a time. Get that patch as good as I possibly can at a certain stage of drying. Walk away from it for a couple hours and then do it again. And this will be all day, just working slowly this hide. So all of that working, we have gotten just about all of the big wrinkles out of it. It's a whole lot softer. Okay. It did some drying while I was asleep and not paying attention to it. So it did stiffen up just a little bit. But we will talk about dealing with that later. The thing to do once it is where you want it is just roll the thing up. And then you can set it aside. So that being set aside, let's talk about the hair on pig hide. So this is a much looser leather than the one which went directly into the bark tan. It's a lot softer, it's going to stay a lot softer, and it's also a lot thicker. So one of the things that's interesting about tannic acid is it's just such a good cross-linking ligand that it just pulls the fibers really, really tight together. So one of the things I would do differently next time I do this is instead of putting these hides, you know, into the tan before they were 100% plumped back up, I would repickle them to rehydrate them. And I think that would give them a little bit more loft. But this, because it was alum treated, it was swelled in the acid, and even though it's a smaller hide and really a thinner hide to begin with, the finished leather on the alum treated hide is thicker than the finished leather on the bark only hide. So working this is the same as working the other, just, you know, folding it and rolling it to break it and to flatten it to get the wrinkles out. Okay. Now you notice I say to get the wrinkles out, and then here there's a couple of really big wrinkles. That's not going to change because that's just the shape of the hide. This is the butt end, and they cut out the butcher cut out the little pigtail, but didn't cut into the hide much at all. So that's puckered up right there because of that. I don't really care. I'm just going to ignore that, and I'll show you the hair side. There's a little bit of detritus on it, but that'll comb out nicely. Okay, it's all nice and dry. It's got a little bit of light dyeing from the orange liquid. Okay, the bark liquor. And, just like the other, we will
roll it up, and set it aside. We've got a couple of rolls of nice leather. Now, if you really want to master a skill, you've got to dig into the information, and you've got to play with things, and you've got to keep doing new things, keep pushing the envelope, keep trying new ideas, keep going back into the literature, reading the old works, seeing how they did it in different ways, trying them, working with different materials, different hides, different skin types. I totally understand. I say that because my goal in these things is to relearn the old ways of doing everything, really master them, bring them forward, and understand them in their full breadth. And that requires pushing it to the point that you fail at something. Because if you haven't pushed something to the point that you failed at it, you don't know the full spectrum of where it works and where it doesn't. Okay? I totally understand if you're coming at this from a perspective of, I have a business and I want a particular product that's consistently a particular way, and learning this as a means to an end. That's a totally legitimate viewpoint as well. But I'm coming at it from the point of I want to experiment with everything possible to learn the whole breadth of these skills. And one of the really good ways to do that is to look at these things in the historic literature. The problem is that in the historic literature, back in the day when the first anthropologists were writing things down in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, and like writing down good, mostly reliable, if still rather racist, information about what they saw people doing worldwide, you know, outside of Europe and the Industrial Revolution. There's good information there, but none of it's indexed in a way that's accessible, right? If you go to that early information and just search hide tanning, you're going to find a couple of books that apply to factories and really don't apply well to the home tanner, and not much else. When, in fact, there's dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of works that talk about traditional hide tanning methods. The problem is they're not indexed by skill. They're indexed by people group. So in the culture of anthropology at the day, the way people wrote manuscripts and titles for manuscripts is the ethnography of such and such people in such and such place. And then when they would record that ethnography, they'd have all the aspects of life, like food, foodways, hunting technique, fishing technique, basketry, weaving, cloth manufacture, leather tanning, work with stone, work with wood, etc. But it's not by skill, it's by people group. So knowing that, one of the things that I've been working on for the last 5-6 years is going through the historic literature, picking out all of these anthologies by people group, by people group, by people group, reading through them, picking out the chapters and re-indexing them in compilations by skill. And I'm making this available to all of my patrons at Patreon. This is an unsponsored, unmonetized channel, and we still need to buy, we still need to buy the vinegar to make the hides, and the lye to make the soap, and the gas money to go and view sites and go on field trips and things like that. So I'm so grateful for all the folks that have joined. And if you would like to join and would like to access those compilations that I'm discussing, they're in the Patreon store. They can be, if you don't want to join, they can just be purchased outright. You can just pay for a download. But if you join at any of the paid tiers, even the $1 a month tier, you get everything there for free. And that's because I'm really hoping to build a skills community that, as it grows, can work together on projects, set up classes, do things, in the future. We'll see where that goes. But I'd much rather work toward building that community of interested people than just selling a couple of downloads. So I hope that you will join us there, and I am most grateful when you do. There's also plans and patterns and some whole books that I've re-edited to be easy to print rather than just like trying to print kind of a garbagey PDF. And one of the plans and patterns is this little bag. We're going to do a build along, sew along, make along, something along for this bag fairly soon. But the pattern for this bag, this little double pouch, hunting bag or gathering bag, is already on Patreon now if you want to get a jump on the project. So let's talk about things I liked, things I kind of like and things I would do different next time. So I really like how this hide that was pre-soaked in alum came out. Okay, as I mentioned in the intro, the big difficulty I had was getting the thing to rehydrate. I thought I had it rehydrated. I had it rehydrated to the point that it was flexible and I could stuff it in a bucket. But as I watched the behavior of the tannins, I realized the core was not rehydrating because it had so much oil in it. It was staying rawhide, like dry rawhide. So by the time I pounded on it with enough solvent and dish soap that the tannin could penetrate, the tannin was penetrating at the same rate as the solvent and dish soap was allowing water to. So the tannin was locking that hardened fiber close together rawhide structure into almost as hard a finished leather. Okay, so it came out very, very thin and very, very hard. Okay, so the alum tanned, even though the alum tanned fur on skin is a smaller animal and a thinner hide, it came out about twice the thickness as the bark only hide. It's the first thing I would do different. I would do, you can get good solvents that are, you don't just have to use acetone anymore. You can get good fat removing solvents from taxidermy suppliers that will get in, open that up, dissolve out that fat, and they're biodegradable and can be easily disposed of, without becoming a hazardous waste that you have to figure out what to deal with. Next time I do pig hides, especially if I've dried them to rawhide stage, I'm using one of those. Absolutely, right? I think it will make things go a lot faster and a lot easier. This should have been a 9 months to a year project, and it took a full 2 years because I was fighting with those oils in the hide, right? So that's not a failure, but it's a learn from. And part of this channel is, like I just said, with the Patreon, I want to build a community of people that are working together to learn this stuff and share their teachings with each other. That's ultimately the goal. The rest is just a vehicle to that goal. So, I want to share the things that I think could have gone better. And I think this project would have gone much, much better with a solvent soak before putting it in. Now, the pickling in the alum that I did on this hide swelled it up, and then the alum kind of kept it from shrinking all the way back together. But even if you don't want to do alum, you can do a pickle, which will also swell the dermis. The skin, it's swelling, it gets thicker, it also gets more porous, and it will absorb solutions faster. Okay? So I would do a strong pickle before putting it in the bark. The downside to that, since I noted also, and again, back to the intro, I noted that the hides have, pigskin has a very waterproof, very, very hard epidermis. Acid pickles swell the dermis. They shrink the epidermis and make it harder. Okay? And so that's why even, some of these, even after 2 years, there's some places where the epidermis is still pale in color because it didn't let all the dye molecules in. It's preserved. It's tanned. They are tanned through, right? 2 years in bark solution, very strong bark solution. They are tanned through. But there's some places that the epidermis didn't dye a consistent color, partly because of the oils, but also because of that hard epidermis. I've been doing some research because a Tlingit woman reached out to me and asked, we've been talking about seal tanning and traditional seal tanning methods. And one of the ways that the processors there work with the seal's hard epidermis is right before they tan it, they treat it with a little bit of a weak base, baking soda being one, but borax is also a base, ammonium are also a base. Those are used in tanning in different places. Okay, a very brief treatment in base, which I think is helping to swell that epidermis. I want to experiment with that as well. So next time I get my hand on some pig skins, there's those things that I want to tinker with. But these are good hides. Now I want to show you these two that I just did for you on this video are the second and the third hides of the 4 that I've pulled out. The first came out really hard. It came out really, really hard because it dried overnight. I had to go to work. It was still wet. I knew it was going to get hard. I rolled it up and put it in the corner and accepted my fate. So this one was not worked properly. So you can see, I can roll it up. You see how it does not want to roll up? And because I didn't work it as much, even less of the stearic acid worked in, so it's got that waxy bloom on the surface. Right? This is, almost a drumhead hard. Okay? But if you get one, this is still a good hide. And we're still going to get a lot of projects out of this. Like I said, you've got to experiment. I was working on some samples. Let me move my little bag here. This beautiful, soft, supple piece of leather is from that hide. The really hard one. So what I do? Well, I cut off a piece that is big enough to cut one of the parts for this bag, because that's what this is going to be, another one of these. And I took it. Can you toss me the towel, sweetie pie? Mm-hmm. Thank you, beloved. Okay. I took a towel. Obviously, this is dry. I wet it and then wrung it out to get all of the free water out of it. Okay. And then you take the towel, fold the leather into it so it's in good contact on both sides. And then roll it up in that damp towel. Put that roll in a plastic bag so it doesn't dry out. Leave it overnight. The next morning, the leather will have absorbed exactly the correct amount of water to be at that absolutely perfect moisture content for breaking properly. So now, instead of a wet dripping hide that I'm trying to get dry so that it doesn't mold while I'm at work, and it's a fight, now I have the piece I want to use, unroll it, and now I can just work this one piece. And I can just be watching the television and just work this and 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 really get it nice and perfect. It's not going to plump up anymore. It's still a thin skin and a hard piece of leather. Okay? But it's now a nice, soft, will make a nice bag piece of leather. Okay? So if your leather comes out hard, don't fret it. Again, back to the idea of reading historic processes, a lot of people's workflow was tan it, slap some oil on it, dry it, deliberately dry it hard, because it's so difficult to time the drying when you're going from wet to all the way dry. It's so hard to do that. It's really hard. And then after it's dry, wetting it back, intentionally drying it hard, planning to wet it back with a wet towel. Or commercial processors that have a staking machine, which most of the commercial staking machines are like a lug to barrel, that, kind of like with a washboard surface, so that the lugs fit in the divots of the other, and then it stretches the hide between the lugs and divots. But, they would wet it back by spraying the hide, like dipping the hide in water and then stacking them up on a pile, right? So then instead of wrapping them in a wet towel, like for large batches, but for a home worker where you're going to be doing one or two hides now and again, and it's just fine to dry them, cut out your project pieces, and then rework the project pieces. The wet towel method works very, very nicely. Now, I do want to note that it will change shape a little bit when you do this. See this line at the top, that nice curve? That was a straight line when I cut it. But there were some folds in here, in this end, which expanded out as I stretched them and softened the leather, right? So it won't shrink, but it might stretch. So if you're doing it this way, you want to make sure you give yourself room. Maybe the hole you were cutting around stretches into the area you wanted to use. You need to reposition a little bit. So give yourself a little bit of fudge room, okay, leeway. So those are my thoughts on tanning pigskins. I hope that this has been useful. I hope it gives you some ideas, some troubleshooting strategies, some things to think about. You know, if you're doing this for the first time, you can learn from some of the things that I wish I had done when I did. These are my first pigskins, right? So I'm learning as I go with this type of material. I've only ever really worked with, you know, your more typical, you know, deer and cattle type materials prior to working with these. So it was a new material for me. And I hope that some of what I've learned can help you in your tanning journey. And I hope that you'll join us here next time at Old Ways Rising Farm.